should be live now.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this special meeting for the Amity Regional Board of Education. I'd like to call the meeting officially to order at 6:32 p.m. Dr. Byers, we have one thing on the agenda, and that is a question and answer session on the school reopening plan.
Yes, so I am actually going to put up a presentation that I will walk everybody through. And because if you guys have ever Zoomed, you know, like when you put the presentation up and you get the little box of people down the side, I won't be able to see if you have questions as I'm going through this. So if you are able to just kind of jot those down and then I can address them afterwards, because I just don't want to miss anybody if they're just not appearing in my scroll. And then, and just so that I can explain kind of what I did with the presentation. And let me start sharing this. Is I really tried to think of what the school day would look like for our students and to sort of walk through kind of the entire day as we currently know it. Please note at the bottom that this still says draft because we are still working on some of the nuances of the plan, a few of the finer points. And then the other thing that I think is really important for everybody to understand is that we are, even though we are a month out and that seems very close, a lot can change in a month with the way that infection rates can either go up or down. So there are some decisions that won't be made until much closer to the actual reopening of school. But anyway, I just wanted to take everybody through this. One of the things that I want to make sure everyone sort of gets an appreciation of is I've mentioned a couple of times that we have a, I think it's now a 59-member reopening committee, but it's kind of the way that it's structured. So Planning and Governance Committee serves as the oversight committee that ultimately will make the decisions with respect to reopening. And then we've divided our work into three separate areas of wellness, operations, and teaching and learning. Under the wellness, it's split out into sort of the physical wellness, and that includes a lot of the requirements around the health offices and actually attending to students who maybe present with COVID-like symptoms, as well as the mental health and emotional wellness. There is an offshoot of physical wellness, which is CIAC required an advisory committee for sports. And most of the people that had to be on that advisory committee were in this kind of area of the reopening. So that's where the CIAC committee branched out. But what you can see in this, and this is a very simplified version of this diagram, is that a lot of things are connected to each other. So for example, the mental health and emotional wellness is connected to the classroom culture and school climate that's really under our teaching and learning area. All of the teaching and learning areas are connected into our professional development committee because they will all need to be attended to. The physical wellness and the things that we actually have to do to kind of make the schools safer, it gets very much tied into facilities. And I could keep making these lines more and more complicated. We didn't, just for the purpose of just trying to show sort of how, even though there are these 11 separate subcommittees, there have been points in time during the development of this plan where two of those subcommittees might come together because they realize there's such a massive overlap in the things that they're discussing. I didn't list the names of the individuals that have participated. That will be in the full plan. But we really have had some incredible individuals who have been part of building this. They've given a lot of thought. I think they've worked on it far more than any of us expected to, put a lot of time into it. And I think we are in a very good place in terms of planning for reopening. So like I said, I wanted to sort of approach this as if you were going through a day with the kids. So the first thing that you have to do is get onto the school bus or somehow get to school. So we will have an expectation that parents do check their students' temperature before they send them to school. We realize that that's an honor system, but that is pretty much how a lot of our work has to be done, is that we have to be looking out for each other, and parents should be checking temperature. If the temperature is over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, then we would ask that parents keep students home. Students will have to wear masks when they are on the school buses, so they will have to be on before the student actually boards the bus. We will have disposable masks on the bus in case somebody forgets them, particularly because we just don't want to leave a student standing at the bus stop if they're waiting to come to school and perhaps not supervised by an adult. So we will have disposable masks available. We have been working with the BoEs so that we will have a uniform procedure for reporting students who refuse to wear masks or who remove them. The idea there is that we wanted to make sure that we were supporting our bus drivers so that they would be able to have kind of a consistent set of expectations, and it wouldn't matter if the student was a feature student or an Amity student, the bus driver would know how to report on those students who are not compliant with those rules. The buses are going to load from the back to the front. The idea being is that the student gets onto the bus, they go all the way to the very last seat at the end, and then no students have to pass in front of another student in terms of loading the bus. Students will be permitted to sit with siblings, but we will try our very best to socially distance sort of non-sibling pairs into individual seats. That is going to be a challenge. We do recognize that, and there may be cases when students are just going to have to sit with other kids. But again, the idea is if they're wearing the mask and there's not a whole lot of traffic passing back and forth in front of each other, then that is actually a safer process for loading the buses. We will encourage parents, if they are able to transport their students, either bringing them into school or picking them up. That certainly will help with the bus ridership. And we recognize that not knowing kind of what the parent transportation is going to look like, we will give a fair warning that there may be a changed traffic flow for the parent drop-off in the mornings. Students cannot ride buses if they are not assigned to. This is kind of, I think it's pretty typical in the elementary levels that, you know, if you're going to go ride home with somebody else, you have a note from your mom and a note from somebody else's mom, and you get on the buses and it's all approved. We've never really been stringent with that with older students, particularly as they get into the high school level, but we really cannot have students riding other buses because it just makes the idea of contact tracing and trying to keep track of the kids that much more challenging. And our buses will be cleaned daily, and then they will be sanitized weekly. That is something that we're working to hopefully collaborate with BoE so that all of BoA has, again, sort of the same expectations with respect to the buses. So that is essentially getting the kids to school. And once they are here in school, the arrival, we will have identified points of entry for all students and staff, and that would be where the thermal scan cameras are. Of course, all students and staff are expected to wear masks from the moment they've gotten on the bus. Now they're walking into the school, they should be wearing masks, and they're going to keep wearing the masks once they are in school. Unlike the way that we have traditionally run our day, where the kids are able to kind of hang out and have some social conversations with their friends and I'd say essentially mill about throughout the school. That is not going to be permitted. Students will be expected to report directly to their first classroom. There will be absolutely no congregating in hallways or by lockers or even in the cafeteria. We will still continue to provide a breakfast program at the high school, but they will have to adhere to the seating guidelines with respect to the cafeteria, which when we get to the lunch slide, you'll see it limits a little bit the amount of ability to sort of sit with other students. And certainly throughout all of the buildings, we will have directional arrows in the hallways that students would be expected to follow to get to their classes, not unlike anybody who's gone to any like grocery store where the aisles are one way in a particular direction. Our student hallways in many cases will look like that. Or if for some reason it's a stairwell and it's wide, we'll have to have, you know, kind of a back and forth traffic flow to get up and down in some of the areas. But these will all be very well marked and designated for students to travel throughout the building. Once the students get to the classroom, one of the things that we have purchased or are in the process of purchasing is an increased use of the student's ID card with scanners. The scanners are really to limit the amount of paper and sort of contact points that we use throughout the day. So things like hall passes or passes down to the counseling office. Additionally, these are going to be used for the lunch purchases, much more so than we have in the past, where kids, if they need to make photocopies and things like that, everything we had done was with keypads. And so think of like an ATM machine, and we kind of want to eliminate that. So we will have scanners. The other idea is that as we have kids moving in and out of the building and the rooms, we want to be able to, again, sort of keep track of where they're going and who they're going to visit. So the scanners for attendance and for checking in and out of the rooms, or even checking in and out of, say, study hall during the day, will all be used to help us sort of very much streamline that attendance checking. The other thing is that it's going to be a tool that will be useful going forward. It's not just a COVID tool. So we do see it has its potential moving into the future. But basically, the kid's going to have to scan in to make sure that their attendance is verified for their class. There will be hand sanitizer for use when the student enters the classroom. We realize that hand sanitizer might be sensitive for some students. So of course, bathrooms with soap and paper towels are going to be open and available. We also will permit, which we always kind of have done, but we'll be very upfront about saying that if parents wish to provide hand sanitizer for their students, they can. There will be sort of two rules with that. First is that it has to be in the backpack when it's not being used, and it absolutely cannot be shared with other students. So that hand sanitizer is only for the student who has it in their backpack. But again, if parents want to provide something for their students that they feel particular about, we will certainly permit that. We will have green cleaning wipes available if the students want to come in and wipe their own desk down. I will be very clear about this. The recommendations from the state of Connecticut say the desks get wiped once a day. And we are following those facilities recommendations, but we also realize that there may be kids who are, would like to wipe their desks. So we will have wipes available. We will provide those wipes. Absolutely nobody can provide Lysol wipes to their kids in their backpacks. That goes completely against all of the regulations and statutes we have around green cleaning. So the school will provide those in the classrooms. We are working right now in going around the building to actually look at every single classroom to figure out if there is perhaps extra furniture in there. For example, some classrooms might have alternative seating. Some classrooms might have a lot of file cabinets. Some classrooms may have multiple teaching desks or teaching spaces. And we are going to have to essentially take out anything that is kind of extra in those classrooms so that we can maximize the space that's available for the students. We will make sure that the student desks or the student seats are in that 3 to 6 foot distance. I know that the 3 to 6 feet sounds very different from that hard and fast 6 foot social distancing that we've heard for so long. But if you, that's certain, the 3 to 6 feet has been a recommendation from our health departments, both Orange Department of Health and Quinnipiac Valley Health District. But even if you listen today to Dr. Fauci, who was on with the governor's call, again, the 3 to 6 feet, the 3 feet is obviously a minimum, and we will maximize as close as we possibly can to the 6 feet. But there's recognition that in some cases, 6 feet is not always possible. We will use dividers in some of our classrooms where the style of seating, oftentimes if you think of like a big work table, like maybe in an art room, where that can't just be broken up into a desk. So we will look at putting dividers in some of the classrooms when we can't actually separate the student seating in the way that we might be able to with, say, an individual desk. There aren't a lot of rooms that are like that, but we are cognizant of some of those. We are going to have to limit the sharing of instructional resources. So things like pencils or scissors and things like that. We'll have to make sure that we're cleaning in between. But I do want to be clear and upfront. There are going to be some classes that have to share instructional resources because that's just the nature of the class. So think of like a pottery wheel in the ceramics class. I can't buy an individual pottery wheels for every single student in the district. So we will have to share things like pottery wheels, or think of some of the tools and the resources that we would use in our auto shop. The students are going to have to share things with other kids. When we do that, we will make sure that we are requiring students to wash their hands before they actually start using those materials. And then certainly when the next student comes in, they would need to wash their hands as well. We'll clean them when we, to the best that we can. But again, not all of these things can be cleaned in the same way that, say, a desk can be cleaned. You can't just take a green cleaning wipe and wipe down the pottery wheel and say that it's all better. So we will have to just be, upfront that there are some things that kids are going to have to share with each other. We will need to continue to provide our small group instruction and collaboration in an online manner, even though the students might be physically sitting in the classrooms with each other. So if you think about a classroom where maybe once in the past you would have said, oh, you 4 kids get together and have a literature discussion, have a literature circle about the book that you're reading, and you'd push those 4 desks together and the kids could sit and talk to each other. You can't do that when you have to maintain the social distancing. And if you could picture kind of what the volume of the noise might be if everybody had to maintain the social distancing but still kind of work in these small groups, it's just not going to be as conducive for that as it's been in the past. So fortunately, because of the one-to-one devices, because of some of the management systems that we will have in place for the one-to-one, like Aristotle, we will be able to conduct those small group or those collaborative learning opportunities, but it is going to be online or via the technology, even if the students are sitting in the classroom with each other. I already mentioned that if a student has to leave during class to go see the counselor or to use the restroom, they're going to have scan in and scan out. And ultimately, in the end, as students switch classes throughout their, the scheduled day, we will need additional passing time at the high school. That has to do with the kind of one-way traffic flow and making sure the students have enough time to follow the directional arrows, because it may not be the shortest path between the 2 classes when kids have to do that. We will also allow students to pass using outside space. So again, that ability for students to actually get outside the building, they're going to have to come back in through some very specific doors to get back into the school, though, if they happen to use the outside to move between classes. The reason why we only need the extra time at the high school is because we are going to be cohorting at the middle schools. I will emphasize that if you look at the state plan, this is considered a high recommendation for students in grades K through 8. In speaking with the medical advisor for the Orange Health Department and QVHD, Dr. Mohammed was pretty adamant that to the best of our ability, we needed to cohort as much as we possibly could. And we realized that this is a significant shift for how we have operated the middle school in the past. But in speaking with Dr. Mohammed and in seeking out his advice and how we can safely open schools, this seemed to be a pretty critical and necessary step. So what will happen is students will be placed into a classroom or class group, a cohort, based on the math class that they're taking, because that is the one class that, because of the content that's being covered, is going to, the standards are actually different. So we actually have to approach the instruction differently because they're working on different learning standards. So they will go into the class based on math. They are going to stay in that exact same classroom with the exact same students for math, English, social studies, Spanish, and science. They will eat lunch in the cafeteria. So they will leave the class and they will go to the cafeteria where we know we have the appropriate social spacing for them to eat lunch there. And even though they will, like an entire team will go to the cafeteria at once, they're still going to end up grouped at their tables in the lunchroom, essentially by their class. PE, they will participate with their team. So that is one of the places where we will sort of have to uncohort. Again, Dr. Mohammed emphasized that we do it as much as possible. So in the cases where we really can't because of the scheduling, he's okay with us uncohorting, especially if it's in very limited cases. And they will participate in life arts with their class as well. The life arts teachers are actually going to rotate into that same classroom that the students are staying in all day. And so the same team is going to have the same life arts at all times. What this really ended up meaning is that since the kids aren't moving around and it's the teachers that were moving around, we were actually able to decrease the passing time at the middle schools because the teachers are going to be moving about much more during the course of the day. So throughout the day, we will be having mask breaks for our students. At the high school, when we are sort of looking at the in-person model, and we'll talk about that, but that's kind of like everybody being in school, we actually have a period of the day when mask breaks would be scheduled and different sections of the building would be able to take their students outside to have those mask breaks. When we switch to a hybrid environment, those will be provided during specific classes at the high school, particularly PE, performing arts classes, and anytime a student has a double science block. There will be an option to take mask breaks during study hall. If a teacher opts to take a class outside to conduct instruction, which we will permit teachers to do, once the students are appropriately socially distanced, they would be able to have a mask break if the class is being conducted outside. And certainly they can take a mask break if they are eating lunch in the cafeteria, obviously. At the middle school, again, they'll be provided during the PE classes, but during the day, because the kids are working in teams and in those small cohorts, the teams themselves will organize those mask breaks. At the middle school, most of those rooms have an outside egress or have an easy access to get students outside. So they will be able to take those mask breaks during the course of the day's instruction. Again, same at the high school. If a teacher opts to teach class outside, students would be able to take a mask break, and then certainly again while eating lunch. As of right now, all the mask breaks do have to be taken outside. Which means that we're going to have to probably get some further guidance from the state as to what we will start to be expected to do once we reach the colder months of the year. And again, students certainly need to be socially distanced in order to take those mask breaks. For lunch, we will be looking at fewer lunch options and less student choice, essentially with the idea that it kind of doesn't matter what line you go and stand in, you're going to get the same things. And that's really to sort of limit kids kind of wandering around and sort of, trying to pick and choose and decide what type of lunch that they want. We'll just kind of have a direct lunch that the students are able to go into. There certainly is going to be an increase in kind of prepackaged items. Again, that's a food safety concern, and that way there's less handling. And things that students used to be able to sort of serve themselves, like a salad bar, all of that type of food preparation is going to go away. The students are going to have to use their ID card to purchase meals. We will not have the keypads available in the lunch, so they can't just say, I forgot my ID card and expect to be able to purchase. And the other thing that we'll be very clear on is that parents will have to sort of prepay for that lunch, or there'll have to be money attached to the student's account, because we will not take cash exchange in the school cafeteria for the purchase of lunches. Any of the cafeteria tables that are sort of round, we anticipate having dividers on those, so it will kind of split the table into basically 4 quadrants. So we would be able to have 4 students sitting there with the dividers between them. And again, a lot of that is because the students really wouldn't be socially distanced from each other, sitting across from each other at those round tables. In some of the schools where we have, kind of the old-fashioned long lunch table, the health department actually said that the way that we've spaced the students out, that's going to be appropriate to maintain the social distancing during lunch without the dividers. We definitely will need to increase the number of eating spaces that we have available, because we have to increase the social distancing. So at the high school, we would be looking at obviously using the courtyard out front. Using the presentation room will be a lunchroom for us for this coming school year. The middle gym may have to be used as an additional cafeteria space. And we will be looking probably at just moving desks into those areas. So students would sit at individual desks in those sort of expanded lunch areas. We will definitely increase the options for students to eat outside. So we've purchased for all 3 schools a lot of tables that we can put outside, just some picnic tables or sort of the mesh metal picnic tables so kids can eat outside. And then we will have to disinfect the tables and or desks between each lunch wave. So that's going to probably result in slightly shorter lunches, particularly at the high school, but the period that lunch is held may actually end up being a little bit longer. It might stretch over a couple of periods. We're still working on some of those scheduling nuances. If a student is ill, so again, we are encouraging parents to check the temperature before they send their child to school. We will have the temperature checked at the thermal scan camera at the entrance. Students who have a temperature of 100 degrees Fahrenheit or higher will be sent home. That is part of the protocols that have come to the health department from the state. We will have an isolation room for students who are exhibiting COVID-like symptoms. So it is a room that will be I'll say separated from the main health office, so that kids coming to the main health office for other illnesses or routine treatments or something like that will not have to interact with the students who may be potentially sick. A student who is exhibiting COVID-like symptoms, we will have an expectation that the parents come promptly and remove that student from school. Ultimately, if a student does test positive, the area health department, so either Orange Public Health or QVHD, is notified, and the contact tracing is done by the health department. Now, we know we are going to work closely with them because we will have schedules and we have the ability to sort of know like what cohort a kid might be in potentially. So we can help them with that contact tracing information, but really that responsibility does rest in the health department. That's where the delineation is. And then we would eventually notify staff and families under the guidance of the health department and with strict adherence to HIPAA so as not to convey any information that would be protected by HIPAA requirements. So then we get to dismissal. We've gone through most of the day, hopefully. So again, dismissal is going to be sort of in waves by different locations in the building to minimize kind of everybody sort of pouring out of the school all at once. Students will still be expected to follow those directional arrows in the hallways to get to their buses. And we've recognized, again, because we're dismissing in waves and not just one bell and everybody leaves, that we will need additional time at the end of the day for that staggered dismissal. We already talked about students having to ride their bus. And again, if there is an increase in parent pickup, we may have to look at a different traffic flow pattern around our schools. Extracurricular clubs and groups will participate in virtual meetings. They will not meet in person, at least at the start of the school year. If we do get to a point where we can resume in-person clubs and groups, then we obviously would still adhere to whatever the social distancing rules are at the time. And certainly no eating or drinking would be permitted, which sometimes is part of those activities that those clubs do. Athletics. So CIAC has given us a lot of guidance in terms of restarting athletics, and we will have an entire appendix of our plan that addresses our athletic expectations, but this is kind of it in a nutshell. All athletes will have to complete a COVID-19 screening prior to participating. They will have to wear masks at all times, except when they are actually in a period of physical exertion. Coaches will also have to wear masks at all times. At the final bell of school, every student is going to leave campus. They're either going to get on a bus to go home, or they're going to get picked up by their parent to go home, or drive themselves if they're old enough at the high school. We will not start sports immediately after school. The idea is to clear the building, to let our custodians start the cleaning process, and everything would be emptied out. Part of this is that athletes will not be allowed to bring their practice attire or equipment to school. The locker rooms are not going to be open and available for changing or for sort of transitioning from the school day to athletic practices. Instead, athletes will return in the evening, probably around a 5 p.m. start. We're trying to be cognizant of when parents might be able to come home from work and transport students, but they will return in the evening and they will report only to their designated practice field or location or area. So they aren't going to be allowed to kind of mingle throughout the grounds and sort of pass other games and practices that might be going on. Our athletic training room is going to be closed. Instead, the trainer is going to go to the individual teams throughout the course of practice, and students will be expected to bring their own water, and absolutely no sharing of water with other athletes on the team. We've had a lot of considerations with respect to facilities. These are some of the ones that have come up more frequently in questions, although this is by no means remotely close to the list of things that Mr. Siza and his staff have been thinking about. But again, we will have hand sanitizer in every classroom, as well as scattered throughout different locations in the buildings, potentially in the hallways or outside of some, more high traffic flow areas. The wipes will be available for cleaning the desks, the dividers for the lunch tables in some classrooms where the furniture doesn't really permit us to do the social distancing just by separating space. We do have dividers in for staff in offices, or think of maybe somebody like a counselor or a school psychologist who might have to work in close proximity with students because of testing or counseling services, or speech and language pathologists who might have to work in close proximity. So there will be dividers as well as face shields available for those individuals. Obviously, directional arrows and signage throughout the building. The HVAC systems, there've been a lot of questions about this, and I was looking for it earlier today, but we actually have a very, very nice and extremely encouraging email from the sanitarian at QVHD about the quality of the HVAC systems that we have and how prepared they are for essentially maintaining a good airflow and circulation in the building. I know you hear a lot about sort of fresh air and being outside, and we are going to encourage students to go outside. But the sanitarian wrote very eloquently about the reasons why we will continue to keep our windows closed in our buildings, and it has to do with the way that the airflow quality works within our HVAC system. So the actual windows in the buildings would stay closed and let the HVAC system do its thing in terms of maintaining air circulation. We will have to increase the number of bathroom cleanings up to two times per day, according to the state guidelines. And there's just a bunch of other facilities things that that Mr. Siza has considered. A big one is all of this furniture that we have to take out of the classrooms to make space. We are going to need storage for it. We will look at options for storing it in spaces in the school that may not be used because of either the size, or we don't envision having a lot of kids working in big, huge, large groups. But we also are cognizant of the fact that we're probably going to have to rent some pods for storage to move all the things out that we have to move out to create the space for the students. If you've been sort of paying attention, this was kind of the latest and greatest last week that came from the state. So this is the idea of the metrics that we would be looking at to determine what learning model we are switching to. I want to be very clear that this is a guidance metric. It is not the only one. And ultimately, in the end, they are still encouraging superintendents to work very closely with the health districts in determining what is going to be the most, the safest and most optimal operating model. And so this kind of puts some numbers to it, but it's not necessarily the only thing that we have to consider. Other things that might come into consideration are like your ability to cohort, or the ability to sort of get closer to that 6-foot spacing versus leaning more towards that 3-foot spacing. So those are some of the other things that and we've had the sanitarians actually come to the buildings to look and see what we've been doing and have sought their advice throughout all of this, to make sure that our facilities are set. So the 3 different models that you will hear about are the in-person learning model, and to some extent this is school as we knew it before March 13th. So it's everybody being present in the school at the same time and expecting full attendance of all of the students. The idea here is, again, that we would maximize the social distancing in the classroom, so that students would wear masks at all times. Obviously, we would have our daily attendance. We encourage the outdoor instruction for as long as the weather is cooperative. The small group and collaboration still done electronically to maintain that social distancing, minimizing the sharing of the tools and resources. All of the assignments and work would be posted through Google Classroom, so that we would have a single learning management system, and then maximize cohorting when possible. So a lot of what I talked through in our plan today and sort of that day that I walked through is kind of the vision of what it might look like if we were in a full in-person learning model. Then there's the remote learning model. So that's the other extreme. So this would be when we hit a point where the spread of the virus is so high that keeping the schools open is not the safest thing to do. And in that case, we would have a schedule that the students would follow in a synchronous manner. So that is a big difference from the springtime and how we operated. We were much more asynchronous in the spring. As a matter of fact, very asynchronous in the springtime. And one piece of feedback that we received from students, teachers, and parents alike was the need to go to a more synchronous model. So essentially, at a certain time in the day, you're going to check into your first period class, and that's going to last for a specific number of minutes. And during that time, the teacher is going to sort of determine how the learning flow is going to happen. And that first period class will have a definite end time. And at the end of that class, you're going to then switch and check into your second period class. So we will follow that synchronous model during that remote learning. We will still take attendance daily. That attendance will be taken when you log in and check into your class at the start of the class period. And we will continue to track that the way that we've always done, as if the kids were sitting in front of us in the classrooms. That daily attendance is an expectation by the state. They've made it clear that we will still track attendance in a manner very similar to when we are in the in-person learning model. The students will have virtual lessons, assignments, lectures, videos, all kinds of virtual formats for providing both direct instruction as well as opportunities for students to do some of the work and the assignments. We do expect the students to log into class each day and to follow the expectations that are set by teachers, much like we expect students to show up at our school each day and to follow the classroom expectations set by the teachers. Every day we would expect something synchronous, but the teachers definitely will still control what that looks like over the course of that class period. So it may start with synchronous learning, and there may be a brief presentation that's provided by the teacher, but then they may break students out to work in small groups, or they may say, okay, go ahead and go do your work, and I'm going to check in with a couple of students, and then we're all going to come back at the end of the period. So teachers are still very much going to control the flow and the process that happens during their synchronous instruction. Again, not unlike what happens when we are in person and teachers' classrooms are adjusted from day to day based on what kids are learning. Again, all the assignments and the work will be posted in Google Classroom. We will operate in the remote learning model on a shortened schedule, essentially functioning in like a late arrival day. So like if we had a 2-hour delay And again, that was based on some feedback that we received from the springtime, which is the idea of having kids engaged online for 6.5 hours a day is kind of, it's a lot. And so the idea to sort of shorten the real direct screen time part of the instruction was a recommendation and suggestions and feedback that came from students and parents and teachers. And if we are on the remote learning model, we will have to continue to provide lunch just like we did in the spring. It'll be very similar. We'll have kind of a drive-through, grab and go, curbside bag lunch that gets delivered to the students. So that brings us to the hybrid learning model, which is the third model that we have to develop for the state. And the idea, of course, is that this is somewhere in the middle between the full in-person and the full remote. And the idea behind the hybrid learning model is to really decrease the population density that's in the school. So hopefully that in sort of taking out half of the students, then you have half of the opportunities for social contact, and you hopefully lower the possibility of spread of the virus. What this essentially looks like is a model where students would spend 2 days in person physically in the school building and 3 days learning remotely. And this hybrid model is the one that was developed in conjunction with BoE to make sure that the A to K families and the L to Z families were all the same families and going to school on the same days. So on Monday, A to K students would be in person while the L to Z would be learning remotely, and then it would flip on Tuesday. Wednesday would be a full day of remote learning, with the idea that that day would be used by the facilities staff to more thoroughly clean the school and to be able to sort of address some of the things that they aren't doing as part of the day-to-day cleaning. So kind of like the weekend cleaning stuff. And then we would return for the in-person and remote split on Thursday and Friday. So in this model, regardless of whether you are in person or remote, there is that synchronous component. So again, if you're remote, there's going to be an expectation that students log in at a certain time and check in and have a face-to-face visual with their teacher. And obviously, if you're in person, the learning is synchronous as part of your daily schedule. We'll continue to take attendance every day. Under the hybrid learning model, we'll actually operate an early release day. So this would be like a PD day or a day when kids get out at noontime, with the idea that we would do a grab and go lunch. And so I think limiting the students' access to the cafeteria, which is a place that does present some challenges for us in terms of social distancing. And of course, then they're eating and their masks are off. If we hit the point where we need a hybrid learning model, then the lunch would be provided to the students and they would grab it and bring it home with them when they're leaving on the bus. And we would still have to provide the curbside lunch pickup for the students who were remote or for the Wednesday. So that's also has to go on. And again, all the assignments and the work posted into the Google Classroom. And so then we have what is really kind of like a fourth model, but it's the voluntary remote opt-in. So parents do have a choice that if we are full in person, or if we are in a hybrid model where students would be coming into the building, parents can make a decision to just have their students participate remotely. And parents are required to complete a form to indicate that the student is going to participate in the remote learning. The student is going to remain in their scheduled Amity classes with their teachers and essentially the same schedule that they would have as if they were in person, because again, the idea is that this is temporary. I believe that the state plan calls it the temporary voluntary remote, because the expectation is that this would not be something that parents would necessarily do for the entire school year. Attendance would be taken daily still, assignments posted in the Google Classroom. And what I forgot to put in here is that if a parent does want to switch out from the voluntary remote and come back into actually being in person, we are just going to ask that we have a 10 sort of school days, or sort of like, 2 weeks, to just make sure that we have, we just have to relook at the space configuration, because we're just not quite sure how many people are going to be in this model and how that might be impacting the rest of the classes that we have. And if we find we can make the transition faster, we definitely will, but at least to start, we would be looking at a 10-day sort of lag. The difference is that the experience of the student is going to be different depending on how the school is operating. So if we are in full in-person, the parents would be responsible for calling in the student's attendance. They would sort of call the attendance line and just kind of say, yes, my child is in school today. Most of the students' learning will be asynchronous with almost no direct teacher instruction. We will have some resources, as far as we understand, from the Connecticut Learning Hub that the state is putting out, that could provide some virtual instructional opportunities. But that idea of kind of, it's going to look a little bit more like it did in the spring of 2020. And then the teachers would still collect that student's work and grade it and provide feedback on that work as if they are part of the class. So they would provide that just like they would for all the other students who are in that class. During the hybrid model, because we have a remote learning period every single day, the students who are in the voluntary remote in the hybrid would actually be able to have synchronous instruction at the same time as the other kids who are having it in the remote setting. This is actually going to have a little bit more teacher contact, but it's very, very limited. And when I say limited, the afternoon remote schedule is like around 10 to 12 minutes per class. So it would be a very short period of time with interaction with the teacher. The teachers would still grade work and they would provide feedback. And of course, on that Wednesday, that's a full day remote, though these students would fully be able to participate in that remote learning on that Wednesday. And then obviously, if the school district goes to full remote learning, then these voluntary remote students would just, they essentially become just part of the entire rest of the student body. So they would have the synchronous learning that's aligned with the school and the district. They would have direct teacher instruction. The teacher would be taking their attendance. And again, the teacher is grading the work and providing the feedback. So depending on where we are in terms of our plan, the learning experience for the voluntary remote students might be slightly different, but they are definitely still part of our Amity schedules. They're still part of our Amity classes. They would still have access to all of the expectations that we would have for those classes, even for students that are there in person. Okay, so one of the questions that I've had from board members has been around the estimated financial impact. And this is kind of where we are right now in terms of what we're looking at. We've kind of addressed things in several areas, obviously PPE, some personnel costs that we know of definitively. We have some personnel costs that we don't quite have a handle on that I'll talk about in a minute. Obviously, cleaning supplies, remote teaching supplies, things that help us support social distancing, like the dividers on the tables. Technology has been a huge piece of being able to make this successful. And then some of the things that we're doing just to add to our wellness area. When we look at some of the staffing concerns that we have, we do know that we will probably need to bring additional custodians on board in order to meet the requirements for cleaning that we have to do throughout the course of the day. We'll also look at shifting some custodial schedules because we won't have those night activities or the degree of night activities that we've had in the past. So we'll probably have to bring some people up to support us more during the daytime. Substitute teachers, we're going to anticipate an increase in number. We also were fortunate, I guess you could say, in that we had already planned for an increase in their daily rate but we will then have to kind of combine both the increased number and the larger daily rate that we're hoping will hopefully encourage people to be substitutes in Amity. Special education school buses may need some additional aids and monitors to help ensure that students are compliant with wearing masks. So we will look at that depending on the kids and kind of how well they're adjusting to wearing the mask when they're riding the buses. We anticipate needing some substitute nurses. Again, because if one of our nurses happens to have to be out ill, not having a nurse on hand is really not an option during the middle of a health crisis. We are looking to hire some non-certified staff to supervise our lunchrooms, our study halls, to be able to check on bathrooms, hallways, mask breaks, kind of just to make sure that that students who've become very accustomed to congregating in places, we need to provide that supervision that they really can't do that anymore. So even think of a study hall where it used to be in the cafeteria and you'd walk in and you'd sit down at a table with 6 of your other friends and you'd kind of hang out there and do your work together. Everybody's going to have to sit in those social distance spaces and they're not going to be able to move around, and we're going to need to just increase the ability for people to be able to make sure our students are following those expectations. On top of that, when we have non-certified staff who can do these things, these free up teachers from doing some of these duties, which then if I need to maybe have a teacher teach an additional class to bring class sizes down, I can do that flexibly and as needed and not be hemmed in and trying to find another person to do a duty to allow somebody else to teach. The other thing that we are still looking at is the need for the nurses' aides to support the isolation rooms. So in the high school, because we have 2 nurses and a nurse's aide, we are okay there, but the middle schools with just 1 nurse, there is nobody else to watch the second essentially health room that we have to create. So we would be looking for a nurse's aide in each of those middle schools. And that's it. And I have talked a lot. And I'm going to take a sip of water because my throat's a little bit sore. And Ms. Cardozo, turn it back.
Well, thank you, Dr. Byers. I just want to tell you, I was exhausted just listening to it. And then having said that, it was clear that you and the amazing team of nearly 60 people really thought of many things that hadn't even crossed my mind. So thank you and the team for all the thought that you put into it. I'm sure that people do have questions. How would you like to handle that?
We can certainly use some time to take them. I can't, if I can answer them, I will definitely do that. I would remind everybody sort of the same thing I said the last time, that some of them I may not be able to answer because they are still part of some collective bargaining negotiations. Some of them, it might be something that's on our minds, but it just hasn't quite hit our plates yet. So it might be one of those things that we're still working on. I can tell the board that we are literally in the process of assembling our document that we would submit to the state, and I'm hoping that the weather doesn't disrupt anything like, power or internet connectivity. We should have that prepped, I would hope, by Wednesday. I will submit it to the state, but at the same time, I will share it to the Board of Education. And then that'll give us about a week with our committee to review it and look for polls and anything else that we want to add to that document before it gets published onto our website.
Well, we should never be without power. We got the microgrid, right? So even if we lose power, honestly, doesn't that automatically kick in and we have power?
At the high school, yes.
Correct. Okay. My question though is, if a student opts out of going to school, are they eligible athletically to then come back to the school and participate in athletics?
So during the point that they are voluntarily opt out, no, because the rationale behind that is that the idea of participating in the physical setting of school is because of a risk of contracting COVID. So it wouldn't sort of follow logically to then say, well, I can't come into the school building, but I can go play sports. The other problem with that, though, from a medical advisor standpoint, is that that individual isn't introduced into our population. That is kind of the benefit of the opt-out for the school. But now if they're coming back and introducing themselves into a sports team, you're actually adding some additional risks and unknowns into that area. We did talk about what would happen to a student, like if they decided to opt out and then came back in October and wanted to join a sports team. And I think where our discussion went today is that they missed the tryout period. And so for those sports that have a tryout and a set team, it wouldn't be unlike a student who transfers from another school. They miss the rest of that season, but then obviously that student would be eligible to try out and participate in the winter or in spring sports. So we just kind of wrapped up that conversation today. And it would be the same for something like the school musical. So if they had selected to opt out of voluntary opt out and remain at home, then coming back to practice for the school musical introduces sort of an unknown back into our school community, but at the same time, it's kind of oxymoronic to the reason for the voluntary opt out in the first place.
What about if they opt out? Are they able to come back and watch sports, or what's the? I mean, if you opt out, then that's it, kind of thing. I'm just curious.
Right now, we haven't even made decisions about spectators at sports yet.
Okay.
So that I can't answer, but that's a much bigger question than just the student.
Okay.
Can I ask another opt-out question?
Mm-hmm.
Can opt-out kids not attend online small group activities and classes or the extracurriculars that are currently virtual?
We did talk about the virtual extracurricular activities, and I think we said yes, they probably can participate in those. In terms of the second question, I think, is still an issue of negotiations.
Okay.
Or actually, your first question.
Okay. And then medical kids who are opting out because they're at more medical risk. This is true for them as well.
Totally different. So a kid who's opting out because of a medical reason would at first sort of fall under the homebound policy. So we have some very specific procedures for students to receive homebound instruction. And so there's going to be a connection of that with the student's medical provider. And there's some forms that have to get completed, but ultimately in the end, their instruction would look a little more like homebound, which in the past, the student basically is provided with work that we have available for them from the school. And then there's some additional tutoring that's provided. It's usually by a certified teacher. Oftentimes we try to match those certified teachers up into sort of specialty areas, their certification areas. But that student would receive the homebound tutoring because for a medical reason, they may be qualifying under homebound instruction.
What if they have a sibling who's medically fragile?
That one we're going to have to that one we haven't thought about yet. We'll have to follow and give some thought to that.
All right, thank you.
I can say that if they have a sibling who is medically fragile, that student doesn't qualify for homebound, so that may be more going to that voluntary opt-out.
Okay, so the medically fragile kid would have some support, but the sibling of them would be doing that on their own thing?
I would say that based strictly on how homebound works, that is correct.
Okay.
But that is a very good question that I will ask the team to sort of look into a little bit more.
Okay.
Carla?
I had a question about, two things. Ninth graders transitioning to the high school and the typical activities and transition events they would participate in with Link Crew. And then also advisory at the middle school and high school, considering how important social emotional will be this year. Is there a plan for those things? Can it
Yep,
happen?
I can say yes to both. So I know that that link crew, and I can't speak to the specifics, but we are sort of approaching it that if the kids are supposed to be back in school, which is essentially like a week later, that we should be able to do some versions of in-person link crew activities, but there may also be some components that are still virtual and remote. And it certainly will not look the way that it used to look, where they're all lined up in the gym and like right smack next to each other, these big, huge lines. So we will look to, but I know that the link crew advisors have been meeting and discussing ways that they would still be able to carry on that program for the incoming ninth graders. The advisory piece or Spartan seminar, the intent right now is to build that into that Wednesday day. So that way, whether or not you are in hybrid or in remote or in person, we know we can count on that Wednesday where we would have that as part of our regular schedule. And yes, the intent is to continue that program. If you know, I would say equally, but it's probably going to be more significant in terms of our work this coming year. So that has been addressed and will be part of our social emotional learning supports. Sheila, I saw you raise your hand.
Yes, I did. I wanted to start off by thanking everyone for all the work. These are certainly very important questions with very serious implications. So I want to express appreciation for all the team there that's been working on this. That being said, I think my concern is mostly about the health risk, especially with the asymptomatic spread that we're seeing more data revealing itself for this age group particularly, but both for our students and for our staff and faculty members as well. So I think I understand that there is no surveillance testing that's being contemplated from the state level or a district level or anything like that. And I wondered if that's something that's been discussed and is not possible to do or is not advisable, or how we would know about an outbreak to limit its spread.
So our outbreak is going to follow the plans. It's really run through the Department of Public Health. It's not through the school itself. So again, if an individual tests positive for COVID, and it doesn't matter if they're a student or a teacher, the health department of the town in which that individual lives is the person who is notified. And then that health department determines sort of what notification needs to go out and follows up on the contact tracing for that. What we have agreed to do, at least with QVHD and Orange Public Health, is that if for some reason, as a school district, we hear about it before they do, because it's very possible that a parent can call in and say, yeah, here's evidence of a positive test, but that information hasn't filtered down from the state to our local health departments. We've agreed that we're going to share that information with them so that they are able to advise us in terms of what our next steps are going to be. But really and again, and you probably heard a lot of these questions asked today on the governor's call with Dr. Fauci. They do not recommend the regular testing or sort of a systematic approach to kind of doing that preemptively. And so we are going to continue to follow those recommendations of DPH and our health districts. And that's, one of those areas where, again, I'm going to defer. I'm an educational expert, and I will defer the health questions to the health experts.
Right. And so I think I understand that we're in a process here. You're filling out some paperwork you're sending to the state. As we get closer to the actual start of school, we're likely to hear more guidelines from the state, including information about that public health surveillance. I know it was in the document that was shared with us today that, so for example, QVHD is our public health agency, and that's our sort of region of data is what we're able to respond to. And I guess I'm hopeful that data will be timely so that, we can safeguard the safety of our students and our faculty and our staff and the wider community that will be sending their kids and bringing them back to their homes.
And I would say we echo that exact same sentiment, because we hope that data is timely as well, because it's going to guide a lot of the decisions that we have to make.
Right. So one last question for you: the 3 to 6 foot social distancing. I hadn't heard about 3 foot being like permissible. Is that like documentation from the state or the federal, or I wasn't sure where that came from?
So that is through the local health department. So if you actually read the state document, it just says to the maximum extent possible. They don't actually put down any sort of clear number at all. So in conversations with our area health district medical advisor, he's said that 3 to 6 feet is sort of the range you're going for. Obviously, the closer you get to the 6 feet, the better off that you are. But that is his interpretation of to the greatest extent feasible, which is the state guidance.
Okay, thank you.
So Andrea, I saw you, and then Jenny, I see your hand going up, and then Mr. Davis.
So I know I had some families inquire as to, it seems as though we're going full force, going right back to school without kind of, entering more at a slower pace like the rest of the state had opened. What is the reason that we wouldn't be going hybrid first with the synchronous and asynchronous model, as opposed to going right into it? I know that the explanation that I've been given is that that's what the governor has stated, and that's what the rule was. And now it seems like the rule has changed a little bit. So is there any clarification on that?
So what we are doing right now is submitting 3 different plans to the state. There has been no decision made at our level as to which model we will go back on. So we're still 4 weeks out, and metrics can change fairly quickly. So we will make that decision the closer we get to the start of the school year. You are absolutely correct that at one point in time, the messaging that was coming from the state was 100% of the kids, 100% of the time, right from the start. They changed that a little bit, and then they changed back to something, they kind of swung all the way to one side, and then we're sort of hitting someplace more in the middle. Ultimately, in the end, it'll be a combination of the metrics that the state's provided, as well as the medical advisors and what they see we've been able to do with the school, between all of the facilities, but also cohorting and sort of the size of how we're going to just try to operate and run things.
So there's no definite yet as to how Amity will be opening.
As to which model, no. The one thing I can say to some extent is to start the year fully remote requires special approval by the State Department of Education. So that is not, it's an option, but there has to be some rationale and justification behind that. So Dr. Turner?
Just a clarification from your discussion with Sheila, I thought that I had read on the athletics slide that you were having daily COVID screening, but in your talk, you had sounded more like just once. Are the athletes being daily screened?
So the screening is actually a checklist for the parents that they have to sort of ascertain before they bring the kid back at 5 o'clock.
Not daily COVID testing.
Correct, not testing, it's screening.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Davis? Whoops, you're on mute.
Just wanted to pick up on what you just said. 5 o'clock, is that an issue of transportation for the kids getting home and having to come back to school? Or...
So that's why we actually went with a later time. And really it's in the slide for the purpose of illustration. We will probably kind of re-examine that as we get closer to the start of the year. And obviously, perhaps some varsity teams where students are a little more self-sufficient with their transportation compared to, say, a freshman team, we may have to look at different time adjustments there. But that it's still that idea of emptying the school grounds out, kind of closing the buildings down and then having the athletes come back, that is something that we will definitely start the year with.
It's the first thing that hit me is some of the outdoor sports may be dealing with a light problem as
Yes.
we go further. And for some of the coaches who are on staff, it may mean pushing their day to maybe 12 hours at around the building, because maybe they live a little too far to go home and come back again. So just some things to keep in mind. You mentioned outdoor classes and encouraging that. How would our Wi-Fi system handle that?
I think, that's a great question. And Mr. Keller is sort of participating here, and he probably wasn't expecting to jump onto the call. But I believe that particularly with the infrastructure upgrades, if we are sort of within the bounds of the school grounds, the Wi-Fi system should be okay. Mr. Keller, can you add anything to that question?
We do not have any current outdoor access points scheduled, but we will have one in every classroom. So as long as a teacher stays within a proximity of the school, within 30 or 40 yards of a classroom, they should get Wi-Fi. Now, if you tried to do that, the further you get, the weaker your signal gets and the slower your data rates are going to be. So if they're trying to use the whole class on that Wi-Fi outside the building without a dedicated access point, it's going to tax it and it's going to be very slow. If the teacher just needs to use it and they're within that range, they shouldn't have a problem.
Okay, so it's something to consider as we do plans for going outdoors.
Yeah, it would be something if we're aware of where they're going to plan on, like if we set, say, 2 areas for outside teacher learning and teachers could only go within those 2 areas, it'd be something easier for us to address, because I believe in our revamp, we have 2 outdoor access points in the quote that were supposed to go up to the field house in the fields.
Mm-hmm.
So if we knew 2 areas where they were always going to be teaching, instead of putting them up there to start the year or even until we needed them, obviously classes come more important than having Wi-Fi at an athletic field. So if we knew the areas, we could try and locate them on a building somewhere that would give the outdoor classrooms Wi-Fi better.
And I would also say, Mr. Davis, too, it's also going to be with respect to, it has to also be appropriate for the instruction. So you may go outside for a Socratic seminar and you don't need to bring your laptop with you. And that would be a great time to take kids outside, because everybody knows how hard it is to hear people with masks in the first place. And if you're going to have a Socratic seminar, if you could go outside and spread everybody out and still have a conversation. And I would probably say that the idea of students bringing their one-to-one devices outside, like there's a whole bunch of additional complications that come with that. So I think that the outside provides an opportunity for some of those things that maybe teachers would still want to do that don't require the one-to-one devices that we can't do in the inside classroom as much.
And one more question, and I guess it speaks to professional development. A lot of concerns that I've heard from parents is if we have a particular model and it changes, how is it going to impact the teaching and learning? And are the teachers going to get enough professional development to be able to handle those types of different situations?
So, excuse me, so first of all, we've done a couple of things. We're obviously starting school a few days later, so that way we can front load several days of professional development to get us up and running. We are looking at ways in which we can, we're all accustomed to the idea that the kids come in the morning and then teachers have PD in the afternoon, or some flip-flop model of that. So we're looking at ways we can support that in the first couple of weeks of school to provide more time for the professional development that we know that we need. If we have to transition to a remote learning model, there will be additional time for professional development in that remote learning model. So that would be built into that model as well. So it's something we've been extremely cognizant of, and we're still trying to work out the details. But the thing that I said to my professional development committee, we have always operated under the kind of the way that we usually did is, well, you have 2 days, figure out how much you can cram into those 2 days and do it the best you can. And I said to them, I said, I really need you to switch that model, and I need you to tell me what we have to do. And then I have to figure out the time, how to get you the time to do that. So it's a different approach, and it will be a little bit more, I would say, PD heavy to get us started, but there is just a vast amount of things that we have to put in place to make this work well. And we are very much aware of that, and we'll spend the time doing it.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Reed. You're on mute again.
Sorry, thank you for all your work on this. I just had a question about, we're going to go to a much more reliant on ID cards, it sounds like. And I'm just concerned, what are we going to do for the students who habitually forget their IDs? It's going to impact their attendance, their ability to get lunch, all those things. What are we going to do?
If I understand how the system works correctly, they can actually link their ID card to their phone, which they will never forget. And they will be able to use their phone in lieu of their actual physical ID card.
You guys have thought of everything.
So that one I feel pretty confident we're going to be okay on. Yes, Carla, Miss Eichler.
The remote plan had the students coming either on Monday and Thursday or Tuesday and Friday with a Wednesday break for remote. Is there a reason for staggering like that, or why not have them Monday, Tuesday, and then Thursday, Friday?
So it was and I'm not going to answer this question really well, and this would be where perhaps if Miss Mann is listening, she can send me a text, but it had to do with the letter day rotation of the high school schedule to make sure over the course of a 2-week period of time, every kid got their A day, their B day, their C day, and their D day. We did actually, when the sanitarian came to look at the school, we asked him about that because we had heard a lot about school districts that were bringing the same groups of kids back to back, then cleaning, and then a different group of kids. And he said that actually that didn't matter because you still have to do the same level of cleaning at the end of the day to prep for the next day. It didn't matter which group of kids you were bringing. So anyway, so it was really to make sure that the students would get all of their letter day rotations in a 2-week period.
That makes perfect sense.
Good. Ms. Hubbard, I see you down there.
Going back to my other question, when will families know how Amity plans to reopen?
So I would anticipate probably not the end of this week, but hopefully by the end of next week. At the time that we send out kind of the final plan for our families to review, I would hope we would be able to say, and this is the model we're going to use to start the school year. I think they need to have that information to then complete the survey. The second survey that we need, which we're going to use to really kind of hone in on the numbers of people who will be participating with us, the bus transportation, the food service, and everything else that we need to have things run. But again, I would say that with a sense of with kind of that caveat that literally, I mean, and again, this is the whole point of having all these plans, that it can literally change in a day, and we're expected to change it in a day. And that would really be more if something happened where I think health districts felt we had to go remote right out the gate. I don't see anything that says that we're going to do that. So we would hopefully know within the next, like mid-August.
Dr. Myers?
Yeah, Mr. Rao, hi, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Question about the scan in and scan out of class. What's the idea behind the scan in and scan out when they leave the classroom during the day?
So it will first of all take students' attendance. So there's just a benefit there in terms of saving sort of the labor task of taking the students' attendance. But then if a student were to like leave the classroom and go to another point in the building, and then obviously they have to scan into that location, it just will help us with sort of tracking and contact tracing where the students have been throughout the course of the day.
Got it. And one other thing, on the HVAC system, has there been discussion about increasing the flow? I know the balance is a delicate thing and we want to make sure that the balance is correct, but there's a certain number of exchanges that happen in, you know, in a 35-hour period. Has that been talked about at all as far as increasing the flow through the air system?
I can take that if you'd like.
That would be great, because I can't find that email from Mr. Siza.
Yes, I forget the oversight agency that makes the recommendation of the levels, but Jim has been following that, and they have recommended a slight increase in the amount of airflow that should come in, and Jim will be sure that our systems are adjusting that, and that is, he specifically reviewed that with the sanitarian, but also from this oversight agency that says, you know, what is the certain percentage you should have of outdoor air? And they've made a recommendation in the COVID environment, what that level of outdoor air should be. So we will be making an adjustment to that.
Okay, good, thank you.
Dr. Turner.
Thank you. I've heard from families who are concerned sort of variously about the classes that involve a lot of heavy breathing, like the choir, the wind instruments and band, or the PE. Are those classes going to run outside differently, be canceled? Like, what's up with those?
So it sort of depends. I did just get a memo today from the state that we're supposed to be getting further guidance for some areas like wind instruments. So hopefully we will get some recommendations from them. We have nothing right now yet. We will probably look at some alternate space for those classes when it's available. Particularly, I think we have some options at the high school with the Brady Center and the Black Box Theater. I think we have some teaching spaces where we would be able to run those classes. Definitely to the extent that PE is able to go outside, they would participate in their activities outside. But I think I was joking with everybody today that they have to be prepared to have some indoor classroom instruction, because likely with our luck on the first day of school, it'll be pouring rain and anything we want to do outside just won't be able to happen. So there will have to be some more didactic classroom components to some of those classes. The one that I will be frank with the board that we're struggling with is going to be band and chorus at the middle schools. Okay. After the visit from the health department, we are going to probably have to have some different considerations for how those are run, if those are run, and some of it may be related to whether or not we are full in person versus hybrid. So I think we're going to have to tackle that plan, but I would say that the way that it used to be, full in person isn't possible. So it definitely, the middle schools particularly are going to have some different structure for chorus and for band.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Ms. Cardozo.
Dr. Byers, thank you and Terry for putting together the numbers for the financial impact. Dare I ask for you to comment on budget?
Well, some of those things are hard, fast numbers. We've made purchases. Some of those things in the area of staffing are estimates. Though we intend to increase substitute pay and have an increased number of substitutes, actually being able to find them may be a different situation when we open. Some of those things were funded from last year's budget. And then though we're doing grade 11 devices from this year's budget, it was budgeted for different items. So it's more or less a reappropriation of a cost. But we do still have at this point, 968,000, I believe, encumbered from people's accounts, staff members' accounts, holding back that they won't be able to make purchases on, certain instructional supplies. Now, granted, staff travel will be down. They might participate in conferences, but they will likely not be traveling to any conferences. Student field trips will be down. So student transportation in that area will likely be less. Late buses will not be offered, as Dr. Byers talked about how the school day will end. So there's certain other things that may open up. They might be smaller pockets, not equal to some of the spending that we're doing, but it's still very, early in there. But right now, I think, depending on how many more challenges we come across, we may be able to weather this.
Thank you, Terry.
You're welcome.
Do we have any other questions? Obviously, Dr. Byers, Terry are always available to us, but at this point, if there are no further questions. Jen.
Sorry, my last question, if no one's got one. Just to clarify that my reading between the lines is correct, you're saying that the health departments are going to be telling you what to do about notification, right?
They will advise us. Ultimately, in the end, it's the superintendent's decisions, but we will lean heavily on what they see in terms of metrics and in terms of our safety from their lens.
So there's not going to be a policy that we know we will be notified if X, but not Y. Like we're just not going to know what's going to notify a parent that their kid's been exposed. Is that correct?
Oh, I'm sorry. You were asking about the notification of when a student becomes
notification of other families in the classroom or in the building.
It's going to be on a case-by-case basis, depending on, I don't even know what all their factors are, sort of when the onset of symptoms are versus when a student is tested. So we don't have something that is hard and fast yet. I don't know if that will change over time as we get better at it, because we haven't had to do this yet. But for right now, every time we've sort of broached the subject, they've just said, yeah, it's going to be done on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you.
And thanks to everyone for all of your very thoughtful questions. Thank you, Terry Loomis. Thank you, Dr. Byers, for your information, your patience, and for all the time that you put into the plans. Can we discuss next steps before we adjourn?
Absolutely. So as I said, we will we're assembling the big document as we sort of speak, so to say. And we anticipate that will be ready midweek. That document will go to the state. We will send it to the board. More importantly, we will send it to the 59-member reopening committee. And I've tasked them that at our next meeting, which is scheduled for next Tuesday, I'm asking them to read the document, and if there are things that they think we still need to really answer that's within our ability to answer right now, just to give us those things so we can kind of close up any gaps and holes in it. Ultimately, what we will do is that document will be turned into a searchable PDF that will be on the website. So that way, if you want to look up and try to remember what the schedule is going to be like on a hybrid B day at the high school, you'll be able to click on schedules and go to that and use that document, hopefully as a tool and a resource. So that's how we'll disseminate it really to our community. At the same time, I will probably put together hopefully it's briefer than the presentation I gave the board tonight, but I'll put together a short presentation for our parents and for the community of kind of what they can expect the school to look like when it does reopen in the fall. Those would go out simultaneously. And again, I'm looking at the end of that second full week in August. which hopefully also then answers Ms. Hubbard's question about when we would coincide as to knowing the model that we would start the school year, whether it was full in person or if it's hybrid. And then also all at that same time, we would send out that second survey to parents so that they would be able to provide us with a little bit more information. So really that middle point of August would be when we would get information out, but then also hopefully with that information, parents would be able to make a more informed decision for what's going to happen to start the school year.
Thank you, Dr. Byers. At this point, I think we'd like to adjourn the meeting. Need a motion? I think I see one. Was that Paul and Chris?
Yes, that was Mr. Davis.
Chris, did I see a second?
Yeah, that second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.